Hi! On the Woodpecker today, I'm making this live edge top for a gas fireplace. Renée's niece has a gas fireplace. As you can see, there's nothing on top. Not very useful. She asked if I would be able to do something with a live edge. She sent me some measurements, but since I had bad experiences, we went to her house and took my own. This is the slab I'm going to use. The first thing to do is to rip one side. This is quite thick. I have to cut it in 3 passes. Now that I've removed some bark, I need to cut this in half. Again, in 3 passes. But when I put the 2 pieces together, I can see that the cut is not perfect. I need to joint them. Now it's perfect. Next, I can mark for domino mortises. This will help the glue up. When I'm done, I tried this, but I can't pull them together, even if I use clamps. So I shave a sliver on each side of the dominoes. I figure this might help. It really does make a difference. Bigger than I thought. It slipped in place so easily that my hand was still between the 2 pieces.
Ouch!
It scraped off a piece of skin just a little bit smaller than a dime. No, this is not fun. Here, I'm going directly to my stash of bandages. For the rest of the day, I felt like Michael Jackson. That way, I'm sure no glue will touch my bandages. When the hands are not in the wrong place, this goes way better. I clamp this and now I have to wait for the glue to dry. In fact, I leave this alone for the night. The next morning, I scrape away the hard glue. The fireplace top is starting to take shape. But even if I had the slab planed at the sawmill, the glue up is a bit wonky. But now that this is 32 inches wide, my jointer is pretty useless. So I'm going to do something to make this straight. I begin by making sure that I have 2 straight planks. On the lifted corners, I add shim. Then clamp it to my workbench. I use setup blocks to have the same height everywhere. I don't rely on them to make sure it's the same height. I use 2 twines. You can see them here. To see if it's straight, the 2 have to be at the same height at the center. If one side is too high, the twine won't touch in the center. If it's too low, one would push on the other. Here, it's barely touching, so it's perfect. Now I need to make a carriage to hold my router. I cut a 2x4.5. I make sure both pieces have 2 sides straight. Okay, I have a long way to go here. I cut some plywood for the base and screw it onto the 2x4. Next, I make sure both sides are the same length by cutting both ends straight. The router will slide just like that. I need to take care of that. The last thing to do for the carriage is to screw a stop at each end. Now I'm ready to plane this. But I'm a little bit paranoid, and I add 2 more clamps so I'm sure the side guide won't move on me. And it's a go. Yes, this takes a little bit of time. But now I have a straight surface. But it's full of small ridges left by the router bit. Nothing that 60 grit sandpaper can't fix. When it's done, I smear everywhere so I will know where I'll pass and sand this again with 80 grit sandpaper. I do this again with 120 and I have a super nice surface. Here's what the bottom looks like when it's sitting on the workbench. I need to do all this again for the top. Finally, it's flat and smooth. The hardest part is done. Now I need to cut this straight. I use a square lined up with the central glue-up line. For the back, I trace a line and cut to it. But I end up with a lot of burn marks. This has to go. On the show face, I have quite a few of those small crevices. I will fill them. But before that, I need to put stain inside them. I use a syringe. I feel I have more control like this. Renée's niece want to keep as much bark as possible. So it's time to remove the grime stuck to it. I wasn't expecting so much dirt stuck in the bark like that. When it's clean, I make an epoxy mix. After mixing it well, I brush it over the bark. In fact, what I want is to fill most of the crevices of the bark so it will be easier to clean. Just a bit easier. When the bark is covered with epoxy, I still need to fill where I put some stain. Now it's time for another epoxy mix, and I pour this where I need it. Here comes the longest part, waiting 24 hours between each coat. I apply 3 coats like that. On the 4th day, I can remove the excess epoxy from the top. Epoxy is quite hard, and in less than 30 seconds, the sandpaper looks like this. I need to clean it. After a while, I don't even stop the sander between the sanding and the cleaning. I sand the top like that, up until the final sanding. Here at least, the sandpaper doesn't come up like it did before. The bottom is much easier because there's only epoxy on the edges. Now I'm ready to apply the finish. I begin by making sure there's no dust left. Then I wipe the stain on the underside just where it will show. Renée helps me to turn it around and I stain the top. I leave this alone for several hours. Then I can spray underneath. I wait 3 hours, sand this a bit and spray another coat. Then I let this dry overnight. The next morning we turn this again so I can spray the first coat on the top. I wait 3 hours and lightly sand the finish. Then I spray a second coat. I do this all day long at 3 hours intervals. In total, I sprayed 5 coats on the top. Here's the result. Not bad. But this isn't the way if I want to continue the rest of the project. So Renée and I bring it inside and put it on our spare bed. With COVID these days, it's been a while since we had any visitors. Now I can continue. I still have to make the skirt to cover this. The first thing to do is to prepare some wood. After making 3 angled cuts, I put them in place and mark where to do the final cut and cut it. This is perfect, but I need to get rid of those burn marks. I'm finally ready to assemble this. Using setup blocks makes it quite easy to mark where to drill the domino mortises. Now I can cut the mortises. I try a dry fit. Since it's perfect, I can drill some holes on top of those pieces. This will help me later on when I'll put all of this in place. I also need to cut the long planks to length. To fix the skirt to the top, I will use pocket holes. So I drill the holes. I know you don't see this jig often. I can't remember the last time I used it. Finally, I'm ready to glue this together. This is quite simple. After spreading glue everywhere, I just need to put it together and add some clamps. Now I need to wait for the glue to dry. The next day it's dry and I can make sure everything is level with each other. Then it's time to sand all this. But I'm not done yet. I also need to make moldings to cover the gap between the wall and the fireplace. When all three are at the same width, I cut a small cove on the table saw by passing the piece at an angle over the saw blade. This is the first part of the moldings. The second is much simpler. Here they are, but the table saw left a lot of marks on the wood, so I need to remove them. The roundover is sanded by hand. I'm finally ready to finish the last pieces. I begin, as usual, by making sure there's no dust. Then I apply stain. I begin with the moldings, then the skirt. I only wipe stain where it will be visible and wait for it to dry. Then it's time to spray this. Now I need to wait for the varnish to dry, approximately 3 hours. I sand the finish. On the white part, I use the linear sander. On the edges, I do it by hand. On the skirt, I spray only 2 coats. Now I'm ready to install this. The first thing I do on site is to stick some tape at the bottom. Then, with a little help, it's possible to put this in place. But it's only now that I notice that this piece of metal is really in the way. I need to do something. Lucky for me, I had brought my drill and some drill bits. I make a bunch of holes in the back. Then I clean in between them. Okay, it's not as clean as if I did it in the shop, but at least it's now possible to push this up to the wall and put the skirt in place. Then I trace around it on the tape. With those lines and centering pins, I can mark on the bottom where to drill the holes and drill them. With some small dowels in the holes, it's possible to put the top in the right place and screw it. Next, all this can go on top of the fireplace. The toughest part of the installation is done. I only have to take care of the moldings. They are held in place with silicone. In fact, I put a line of silicone, but on the top and the bottom, I use hot glue. The hot glue will hold the molding in place while the silicone dries. The only thing I really have to do is to hold the molding in place while the hot glue hardens. Here it is. The mantle top is in place on the fireplace. Now you may have a better idea of all the work that's involved to cover a fireplace like that. And see you soon for another episode of The Woodpecker.